Welcome to the Sandy Sedgbeer Show. Conversation at the cutting edge. And now, here's your host, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello, welcome. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and you're listening to Conversation at the Cutting Edge. And now, guest James Tiburon spent 33 years circumnavigating the globe, traveling to over 75 countries in his work as a professional engineer and geologist, a career that gave him ample opportunity to focus on understanding the energy of the living earth from both a scientific and a metaphysical perspective. A scholar of metaphysical studies of varied disciplines, he's had a great interest in metaphysics, sacred sites, grids, ley lines, portals, vortexes, healing gems, crystals, auric maintenance, EMF, light body, and spiritual growth and music. Tiburon was a featured guest speaker at the United Nations Society of Enlightenment and Transformation in New York City. He's visited over 300 sacred sites across the globe and has been a guest speaker at the Elders Speak Conference in Sedona and the Eagle and Condor Elders Gathering in Peru. He's also hosted many Earthkeeper conferences and pilgrimages to sacred sites. James Tiburon, thank you for joining us today. Hi, how are you?
Very good. How are you doing, Sandy?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you very much, Tib. Now, I opened the show by saying that there are many people who scoff at the idea that we plan and orchestrate the circumstances of our life before birth in order to achieve our higher purpose of being here. But as someone who spends a lot of time channeling information about and working with Atlantean crystals, it's no coincidence that you spent the first 23 years of your life in the largest crystal site in the world, Arkansas. Tell us a little bit about your journey from Arkansas through Brazil, where you spent 7 years among more crystals, to what you're doing today.
Yes, we were discussing yesterday in our pre-interview chat. My life makes a lot more sense when I look back at it now in retrospect. But yes, I was born in Arkansas and grew up amongst the crystals. My father worked at the University of Arkansas as the administrator for the law school. And we live in Little Rock, which is where the deposit, the largest deposit on the planet of quartz crystal, begins. And Arkansas is the largest singular deposit of quartz crystal on the planet. It starts in Little Rock, swings in a backwards C shape for about 180 miles and is about 35 miles wide. It surfaces around the area of Hot Springs National Park. And as a child, my father would take me fishing almost every weekend, weather allowing, to Crystal Springs, and he would fish on Lake Ouachita. He would fish while I would dive for crystals, and it was very easy to fill a coffee can full of those in a few hours. But I've always had the interest in crystals, in rocks and stones, and so it made sense that I grew up in that energy. And as soon as I finished university, I moved to Brazil. Brazil is a larger deposit of crystals, but the crystal deposits in Brazil are broken up into 2 or 3 different areas, primarily in the state of Minas Gerais and the state of Bahia, and I spent considerable time in both. So while I was in Brazil, I not only continued my interest in rocks and crystals as a geologist, but I had my metaphysical awakening. I was given a book about Edgar Cayce while working in Brazil as a geologist by a German man. And it was the fantastic book called There Is a River by Thomas Suger, which is the biography of Cayce. And I had an incredible epiphany. I had my metaphysical awakening. And so as soon as I read that information and realized that we are here on a reincarnational basis, the laws of cause and effect, it just absolutely triggered me. In fact, when I read the book, I was on the banks of the Amazon River, and I worked in the Amazon way, way past Manaus at a place where the river was 13 kilometers wide. I was the only non-Brazilian on the location, and I read a lot. And so I had time to contemplate, and what a magical place to be in. But from that point forward, I read every metaphysical book I could get my hands on for the next 30 years because I never lived in a country where I was particularly interested in watching television. And Brazil, of course, is Portuguese speaking, and after Brazil, I spent 5 years in Africa in a French-speaking location, and then spent time in India, Russia, and then came to the Middle East, and then back to South America in Venezuela. So the entire time that I was living overseas, I probably read every metaphysical book that was in the ARE, Association of Research and Enlightenment, library at one point. I would make 1 or 2 trips home a year and go back with suitcases of books and just spend my time reading. And I had a hunger. I had an absolute fascination. So it all made sense to me that I grew up in Arkansas, spent time in that crystalline energy, and then went to Brazil and spent time in the other massive deposit of quartz crystal. And while I was in Brazil, I also developed a keen interest in gemstones. Brazil is virtually a cornucopia of every mineral, gemstone, precious and semi-precious that exists. There are very few gemstones that don't exist in Brazil. And I know we're going to be talking about creating your life in a few moments, but this was a perfect setup for me because after I had been in Brazil for 2 years, and I was there for 7. After I had been there 2 years, they changed my salary setup to where I received a significant percentage of my salary in local Brazilian currency, which at the time was called a cruzeiro. The problem was that the Brazilian currency at that time devaluated at a rate of about 400% per year. So you couldn't put it in the bank. You couldn't save it. And so I was forced to do what other Brazilians did do, and that was buy gemstones. Now, Brazilians also had the options to buy land, gold, and foreign currencies, but most bought gemstones because they were everywhere. And so I started buying gemstones with that percentage of local currency so that I didn't lose the value of it. I couldn't, if you put $100 in the bank and came back a month later after working, you had about $50 in the bank. That's how fast it devalued. When I got to Brazil, 7 cruzeiros made $1. When I left, 22,000 cruzeiros made $1. And so that gives you an idea. But I started buying gemstones at about the same time I was studying Edgar Cayce. And Cayce is just a vast resource of information about gemstones. And he's an incredibly credible psychic source on medical issues and gemstones. And so I began to experience firsthand the ability to tell the difference between gemstones, to actually feel an energy coming out of some gemstones and having a sense of what they could do, what they meant. And so for the next few years, I had the opportunity to learn about gemstones. So I began studying gemology so that I knew what I was buying, so that when I bought a green stone, I could make sure it was an emerald and it was not glass. So that was an incredible setup for me, and I studied gemology and became a gemologist in the spare time that I had down there as well. And so that was a great opportunity for me.
Now, I mean, there you were in that beautiful country surrounded by crystals, and suddenly your salary gets changed so that you are forced, bummer, to buy more crystals. Do you think this is part of your own construction, or do you think you had unseen help from the other side, or do you think it's a mixture of both?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think that it was absolutely a contractual setup. I think that I put myself in a situation where I would be, for example, during my first 23 years in Arkansas, in that energy and have a sense of these crystals. When we would go to Lake Ouachita, to Crystal Springs, which is right on one of the areas where the crystal strata surfaces, I was fascinated with these crystals, and this was back in the early 1960s, and we moved to Little Rock from the main campus of the University of Arkansas when I was 6. And so that's the time we started going to the crystalline areas, and there were literally, Sandy, there were rock shops on the side of the road going to Lake Ouachita that had 3 and 4 foot crystals, quartz crystals, laid on small tables that were raised about 2 feet off the ground, and just massive, massive crystals that were virtually, considered at that time just simply beautiful minerals. I can recall many times that we would stop at one particular place to get lunch, and it was right next to a rock shop, because rock shops were everywhere in that crystal area. And I would wander through those and see massive, at that time, crystals that were larger than that, that were taller than I was, and just be fascinated with them. And so from the time that I moved on to Brazil after I finished university, it was a natural attraction to look at the crystals there. And then this situation where I had no choice but to get involved with gemstones was an absolutely natural setup. So I think it was something that I had planned and something that was meant to occur, something that I scripted, but also a setup that on the surface seemed stressful in the beginning, but that led to something higher. And in fact, my entire life of working overseas as a geologist was very difficult. I was a foreigner most of the time, and as I told you yesterday, I experienced 4 coups d'etats. I was rescued, my wife and son and I, by the French Foreign Legion in a very violent situation in Africa. But by being in these foreign situations, several other setups occurred. Number one, I had to learn how to communicate non-verbally, because when I got to these countries, I did not speak the languages. I eventually learned to speak Portuguese, Spanish, and French, but I learned it the hard way. I learned it without taking lessons in advance. I learned it by being there, which is probably the best way to learn a language. It's, again, a setup that forced me to do so, but until I became fluent in those languages, I needed to learn how to communicate and analyze situations non-verbally. For example, there were a lot of situations in some of these places where a foreigner could be taken advantage of. You could get in the wrong taxi and be taken out some location and robbed. And in fact, that did happen one time. And so I learned how to look at people and judge them out of necessity. I developed the ability, as anyone can do, to read situations on a nonverbal level, which opens the third eye, which develops the telepathic aspect. And in both countries, in Brazil and in the areas that I lived in Africa, I lived in a country called Gabon, which is where the equator hits West Africa. But the responsibilities that I had included the Congo, Zaire, Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Chad, and Namibia. So I traveled quite a bit down there as well and learned to speak French in that process. But you learn to communicate that way, but also I had that time. I had, when I was not working, I was reading, and so I probably read 2 to 3 metaphysical books a week by necessity. There was nothing else to do, so to speak. In the beginning, before I had my metaphysical awakening, there were many times when I thought I was on the wrong track, when I thought that I should be, after I had my metaphysical awakening, and it absolutely changed my life. I grew up a religious person, but my family were all Baptists, in Southern Baptist in Arkansas. My father was a deacon, and my grandfather and 2 of my uncles were Baptist ministers, Baptist preachers. So I was brought up into church. We went to church every time the door was opened. And so when I learned about reincarnation in Brazil through the Edgar Cayce material, I literally had an epiphany. I had bright lights occur, and I felt a tremendous joy that I had finally found the answers that I had never found previously. And it made sense to me, the law of cause and effect of reincarnation. And from Edgar Cayce, I went into the Seth material. I went into everything that was available over the years, the Lobsang Rampa books from the Theosophical Society, from the Rosicrucians, everything that I could get my hands on, I read. And then eventually got into the Carlos Castaneda material, and so constantly studied. I studied in the time that I worked in the Middle East. I studied the book, the Quran, to a certain degree, and then Hinduism when I lived in India. So I was always open to looking for commonalities and studying these things. And so at one point, I came very, very close to quitting my 3D job and feeling like I needed to move to India and just go to an ashram and meditate. In retrospect, and I firmly believe this, in retrospect, I believe it is very often our 3D chosen jobs and professions that allow us to open into spirituality. I think that we have to keep our feet on the ground. I think that we are here on this planet to learn how to be creative in our thoughts, how to create what we want in our life. But it is a filtered process that takes years and years of effort and study. And so there was, in the beginning, a conflict with feeling that I should be doing something else. But I can tell you now, without any doubt, I was on the right track. And had I not have held that job, I would not have had those 30 years of study. I would not have learned other cultures. I would not have learned to look at our Earth from the perspective of a citizen of the world. I would not have been able to widen my horizons beyond the viewpoints of an American. And I would not have been able to experience firsthand the amazing sacred sites. I've had the opportunity to go to sacred sites everywhere, and I always made time in my travels to take a few days here and there and go visit some amazing area. And I learned that the living Earth has natural deposits that have different ionic ratios, different electromagnetic backgrounds that absolutely interfaces with our auric field, with our, what I now call the crystal electrical field, what was previously called the electromagnetic field, or EMF. And so that allowed me firsthand to learn about the mechanics of the aura. When I lived in Brazil and when I lived in Africa, I came face to face with many of the locals who had beliefs in anism, or what might be loosely termed voodoo. And so I sort of had an on-the-job training of confronting those situations and confronting what people might call a psychic attack, and putting them more into scientific terms. And so that was the basis of my study of how to maintain the auric field. And as I told you yesterday, as I got higher in the company, and I was 33 years with a company of engineering, I got into the real areas of psychic manipulation, and that was corporate management. and
Ain't that the truth?
I saw absolute correlations between the way a voodoo practitioner might work and a corporate manager, many of whom felt like the world circulated around them. And so I incorporated a lot of that into the Metatronic keys, and I do firmly believe that the core, that the absolute cornerstone, the basis of our moving higher in multidimensionality, moving higher in awareness, involves the base point of understanding how to maintain a healthy, vibrant, crystalline electromagnetic field. And I do believe that the crystalline grid, which completes itself this year on the 12-12-12, is the basis for the changing of our auric skin, so to speak. We are moving from a magnetic grid into a crystalline grid. We are moving from a electromagnetic field into a crystalline electric field, which is a much higher vibration.
Well, I want to get into that in a moment. First, though, I'd like to know, when did you first start channeling?
You know, in retrospect, I think I always have. I became aware of the ability to channel in an interesting way. When I went to Brazil, you know, I had these opening experiences. I had a sense of spiritual guardians from that time. It answered a lot of questions. But when I became aware that I was absolutely channeling, came later in my life, and I began fasting. I had studied everything, and after I moved back to the States, I had a series of dreams where I was being told I needed to do a vision quest. And I didn't know what a vision quest really was. And so I went finally to the internet, and I found a man that offered fasting. So I went to Sedona, Arizona, and met with a man named Adam Yellowbird, and he facilitated me in a 5-day vision quest / prayer quest. And I went without food or water for the first 3 days and went without food for the entire 5 days. And I did it on a mountaintop south of Sedona. And it was an incredible experience, and I didn't know what to expect, and I had never done it before, and I did not have a vision. But I had other things that happened, not the least of which was I lost a lot of weight. But I had a tremendous sense that this was important. And so I was invited back to complete the process because he had lived on a Lakota reservation, and he's a very, very fascinating man, and he had grown up on a Lakota reservation, and so he did the vision quest in that modality. And so he invited me to come back and do it once a year for 4 years, and I did that. On the second year, I went to a Indian reservation in northern Mexico, and I had other breakthroughs. I did not have a vision, but I had other obstacles within myself that I was able to think about and release. And probably during that 5 days, I cried for 3 of them, not knowing why exactly. But it gave me quiet. It gave me clarity about my life. And I always did these first vision quests at a time when I could get away from my job. And so I chose December because it was near Christmas and no one would be really looking for me at that particular time. And I would take vacation time. And on my third one, I did it in Red Rock National Forest, just outside of Sedona, at a place called Shaman's Dome. Incredible place. And it would always end on the winter solstice, December 21st to 22nd. And so that would be my 5th day. And so on this third year of vision questing, I literally had an out-of-body experience. On the vision quest, on the 4th day, I woke up, and it was really cold at night, and there was snow on the ground, and I was laying there thinking, what on earth am I doing here? This is uncomfortable. I'm miserable. It's really, really cold. Yellowbird was supposed to come bring me some. They did allow you hot tea occasionally. He would bring me some kind of herbal tea. And after my 3rd day, I was allowed to drink, taking a fluid. But on that morning, I woke up, and this was the morning of the 4th day, and I was so happy the long, cold night was over. And I got up and started putting my boots on. I just had a sleeping bag. The sun was starting to feel warm on my face. And I opened my eyes, and I saw a Native American man sitting or standing right in front of me. And I was amazed. And quite honestly, the first thought that I had was, my God, I'm having a vision. And I closed my eyes, opened them again, and he was still there. And he had a large mountain lion with him. And he was 3D. And he had a small red feather in his black hair. Beautiful, thick black hair. He had a regal face. He looked to be about 50 years old, but solid black hair. And he was communicating with me telepathically, and he told me to get up and come with him. And I said back to him mentally, well, I'm waiting for Yellowbird. And he said, no, come with me. And I finished putting my shoes on. I walked with him. We went down a small arroyo and then went on top of Shaman's Dome. And then he disappeared. And while I was sitting on Shaman's Dome, suddenly I had a flash of bright light, and I was floating above it. I saw myself sitting on the edge of Shaman's Dome, and I was literally flying over the valley. In fact, I saw Yellowbird's old pickup truck starting to come down the dirt road. And that was an incredible experience for me. And I went on to do a total of 7 of these. And every year after that, I had that out-of-body experience, and it was achieved in a fully natural format. But I stayed in contact with a red feather for about a year and a half after that. And after I finished this series of vision quests, I went to, and I was called for this, I went to South America, and I did the shamanic journey, and I did ayahuasca 4 times. And when I did that, I absolutely had incredible out-of-body experiences. And it's an extremely powerful, and you have to be ready for it. It's not for everyone, but it was for me, and it was incredibly opening. and allowed me to go through the pineal and navigate in that other dimension. Graham Hancock, who you and I have spoken about, who is the prolific author of over 15 books, also has had this experience, and he calls DMT, which is the active ingredient of ayahuasca, the God molecule. And it was a very, very powerful experience for me, and you have to be ready for it. But that opened me up in a way. And it all happened in the sequences I believe that it was supposed to happen. But it was the last experience of that I did in that particular time was 2007, and I was channeling after that. In retrospect, I really think that I was channeling my higher self all along. But this came through in such an undeniable way that allowed me to spring forward.
That's when you started channeling Metatron in 2007, isn't it? Why Metatron, do you think?
You know, there's a lot of discussion between do we channel people, do we channel our higher self? And I think that the first step is channeling your higher self. And then I think if you come in with a particular soul contract to do certain things, then you channel others. But there is no aspect to channeling being outside of yourself. Peter Casey, who was a channel, absolutely stated that he did not channel anything outside of himself, but that once we get high enough, we are all in a plurality consciousness. I think that I channel Metatron because he tends to be scientific in nature. He is around the sacred geometry. Seth, who I channeled for a certain amount of time when I was living overseas, although I didn't recognize it at the time as channeling, is an aspect of that Metatron. And so I'm less inclined to put titles and divisions on who we channel. And I feel like the interpreter, a lot of what I bring in comes through my root soul, which is Tiburon, and he is a Pleiadian. And he is part of the Metatronic energy. So I think that I have always been, in most of my lifetimes, a source of the scientific aspect of metaphysics. And I think that falls into what could be called the Metatronic field, the field of sacred geometry, the field of the physics of metaphysics.
And of course, we need the science, the physics of metaphysics in order for the mainstream to begin to give it credence.
Well, yes. What Metatron says is that in the past, we have omitted the sacred from the scientific, and we have omitted the scientific from the sacred. And so a lot of what I try to do with metaphysics is to bridge that gap, to bring in the full circle of the sacred with the scientific, because they work together. And what is happening in 2012 is that we are moving into expanded dimensions and the shadows are being removed. It is time for us to understand who we really are, to understand our history. To quote Graham Hancock, he says, we are a species with amnesia. And through people like Graham Hancock, through people like Michael Cremo, Dr. Samir Osmanagic, and David Hatcher Childress, they are absolutely bringing in vital information about the hidden history of the human race that was hidden in front of our eyes, so to speak. In his book, Forbidden Archaeology, Michael Cremo talks about the amazing evidence that is there that humanity had been on this planet far longer than mainstream science will recognize. You know, one of the most astounding examples is that there have been carbon steel, which is a alloy that would not naturally occur. There has been carbon steel ball bearings with grooves placed around them that have been found in a gold mine in South Africa. And here's the kicker. These ball bearings, which absolutely are manufactured, absolutely could not have occurred in nature, were found in a formation that is 2 million years old, locked in a sandstone formation of the earth that is over 2 million years old. So that's quite fascinating. But there are all sorts of other evidences around that indicate that we have a much richer, much more extensive history of being on this planet than what we recognize. And so a lot of what we do in our Earthkeeper conferences are to bring in these credible academics that have put in a tremendous study to prepare this type of information. The work that Dr. Samir Osmanagic is doing in the discovery and exploration of the Bosnian pyramids is just astounding. And this incredible man, who is a legitimate PhD, funded these excavations himself. And these are incredible things that are happening. But he has evidence now, and in the beginning, the academic world of archaeology denied that these were pyramids at all. And yet he's continued the excavations and now has discovered building blocks that were chiseled, inner chambers, and he is just doing some incredible things. So it is people like that I am drawn to bring in, to bridge the science with the sacred, because the two are together. And so I think that what is happening in 2012, the way that I define the term ascension, is the expansion of the dimensional fields of the Earth. I think that the 0 point that people like Dr. Greg Braden was the first to talk about, if you think about 0 point, how do you define that? It is simply a field in which electronic or electromagnetic attraction does not occur. And that is what occurs in the crystalline structures. When you have perfectly stable crystalline fields, you are in a non-polarity vibration. The ascension, as described by Metatron, is the expansion of the Earth beyond 3 dimensions to 12 dimensions, and dimensions 5 through 12 are non-polarity 0 point crystalline frequencies. And it is in crystalline frequencies that we move into higher vibration. I believe, and this shocks people to a certain degree until you think about it, I believe that the angelic field is the field of antimatter. I believe that antimatter is not the opposite of matter. It is a spectrum of matter, that matter occurs just as does light in spectrums, and that on the one end is physical matter, which occurs in less, according to whose information you want to believe, in less than 7% or 3% of the cosmos is physical matter. All the rest is, and I don't like this term, dark matter or antimatter. And so it makes sense that our core source would come from the field of antimatter. In fact, I believe every night when we go to sleep into dream state, we go into the etheric realms, and if you want to put a scientific moniker on it, that would be the field of antimatter.
It's interesting how little we know. Graham Hancock is absolutely right. We are suffering from amnesia, but it feels like we're waking up now. I was very interested in your book, 2012 and Beyond, Wisdom Along the Path. Metatron talks about the Giza pyramids and how they've disappeared and reappeared several times, dimensionally speaking, that they flash and flux, in a manner of speaking, according to their own cycles, with no single fixed beginning point in the linear perception of 3D. Now, I find that almost impossible to get my head around.
Yeah, a lot of people tell me that some of the things that Metatron says, that on some level they know it's right, but they don't understand it. Yes. And so there is a lot of scientific studies that are coming around now that indicate, as we get into these very, very powerful microscopes where we can actually observe electrons. It has been understood for a number of years now, since 1994, I believe, that electrons, while they're orbiting a nucleus in certain elements, can be observed, and they disappear. They literally disappear and then come back in. So where are they going? Why are they invisible? Some recent studies shows that fullerenes, when they are bombarded in a laser beam in a straight line, will change from being physical matter to being a wave of energy. And so the idea is that everything exists in multi multidimensionality. We exist in multidimensionality. We are, in our base, even physical reality, made up of atoms that are geometric in nature. Our atomic structure, our molecular structure is geometric in nature. Metatron says that the fabric of all reality is sacred geometry. And sacred geometry figures, particularly the platonic solids, are multidimensional. And so the pyramids, to get back to your core questions, Metatron says that any time a pyramid is constructed to phi, and that is the angle of 51.51 in the case of the Giza pyramids, that when pyramids are constructed to phi, they automatically, these four-sided ones, form the opposite end, and the as above, so below, they become octahedrons. And that in sacred geometry, in the reality of our cosmos, octahedrons are the gateways. And so these pyramids that are in Giza, that are in so many places across the planet, become multi-dimensional and have no beginning and have no end once they get into that foam where space and time go together. Metatron says that space is congealed time, and that space and time have a opposite aspect. I think it was Bentov that developed the idea of all reality having a torus effect, like a snake eating its own tail, such that it becomes alpha omega, no beginning and no end. And Metatron says that when we reach that flashing core of Planck's number at 10 to the negative 43 power, all space and time exist in sort of a homogeneous foam, so to speak, where events are floating around in space in separate holograms, but there is no time structure on them. And so that's sort of a different topic on itself. But that is what we have to understand, is that we are multidimensional beings having a linear experience on the Earth plane. And that is why why Metatron refers to the Earth as the University of Earth, that we are here with the primary purpose of learning how to be responsible creators with thought energy, with emotional energy, and that in other dimensions of existence, which are constantly expanding, consciously growing, whatever you think is instantly manifest. And so we go through the University of Earth, in a sense, as a credential to learn the full nuances of creatorship. And that makes sense. I mean, that does. You can look at certain people's lives and understand some of the great ones that came here with specific purpose. You know, they said that Mozart was writing complex musical symphonies at the age of 6, and you have people like Nikola Tesla, like Albert Einstein, that just came here with tremendous purpose, tremendous mental capacities, and so it's easy to understand, for me at least, the dimensional impact people like that have, where they obviously came in here with knowledge that had been acquired in other Earth times of mastery.
Well, of course, this is, you're talking about this Earth as the law of attraction, in essence, really. You know, if we're here to really learn to master this whole thing about thought and energy, this is what many people, the masses are, reading about in books like The Secret, but don't fully understand.
Well, I think of the law of attraction a little bit differently. I think the law of attraction is that when you have a great fear, you attract it to you. Because you put attention on it. When you have a great love, you can attract. Me, the law of attraction is that one frequency of thought attracts a like frequency of thought. I think the law of creation involves the law of belief. I think that we have to believe what we are creating, and in a sense, that's a natural protection, because so many times in our experiences here, if you get into an emotional situation, and at some point during our life, whether it was at childhood or teenage years or whatever, we have these thoughts. We truly don't want to manifest. And if we had the ability to immediately manifest every thought, it could be really a mess. And so I think that there is ingrained in the mechanism certain checks and balances. I think that you truly have to consciously examine your life, and you have to reach a point where you have that hunger, where you have that desire to truly understand why you are here. And Earth lifetimes are so fast, absolutely so fast. And while we are going through linear time, obviously it seems like we're here for quite a long, long, long time, but when we are on the other side observing, it is a flash. But I love the observation that Kurt Vonnegut, the Pulitzer Prize author, used in his novel that was made into a movie called Slaughterhouse-Five. Interesting name. But the book, written by Kurt Vonnegut, which was a fictional book, talks about someone becoming unstuck in time. And this character, when he would go to the other side, would look at people on the earth and said that they looked like a centipede or a thousand-legger with baby legs on one end and old man legs on the other, like a span of the Rocky Mountains. And I think that's an absolutely great description of much of what happens here. But I think the idea of time being fluid is essential. But I think we have to reach a point in our life where we have to understand that we're here for a purpose. And the challenge, the soul quest, is to understand the true purpose and to understand the mechanics of how it works. And this is how we relate to our higher self. When we have that hunger, when we have that point where we really want to know, then we'll get there. And then we are given the knowledges, we are given the teachers, we are given the mentors, we are given the information at the time that we really bring it in for ourselves to learn how these things work. And so I think that the ability to understand how we create is part of the reason we're here, learning how the pineal gland is the entry into multidimensionality, and learning that the things that we believe in, we absolutely can manifest. Now, I think one of the issues that often comes up with the law of attraction is that the books that have been written about the law of attraction don't take into account multi-dimensionality. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of that. If you have had, say, 15 lifetimes as a priest or as a monk who took poverty vows, who had the belief that all things material were evil, that money is the root of all evil, and you took these poverty vows in 15 lifetimes, and now in this lifetime you have not taken a poverty vow, and you realize that money is only energy, that we need to be able to create a certain amount of abundance to manifest the things in life that we want, that there is an appropriate abundance exchange. But still, so many people in metaphysics can't manifest it. And what I believe, and what Metatron has told me, is that is the point where we have to recognize multidimensionality. If we believe, and most people in metaphysics do, most of your listeners now do, believe that you've had past lifetimes. Most people are beginning to understand that linear time is an illusion and that all of our lifetimes exist in simultaneous time, meaning that those 15 lifetimes you have with poverty vows are alive and well right now through that flash. Remember I talked earlier about the harmonic flash that creates our reality? It is that flash. From the time that I snap my fingers here and the time that I do it here, we have each had a moment of consciousness in all of our simultaneous lifetimes. It goes around in a big, big circle and comes back. And it's like the frames on the celluloid film. They're actually individual frames, but we see them as being constant. So we are constantly experiencing all of our lifetimes at once. And so if you have 15 lifetimes of poverty vows that are ongoing, and you have one lifetime now where you're trying to create and manifest abundance for yourself, you're getting outvoted 15-1. And so this is where I think that it is essential
in this time of expanded energy, in this time in which our solar system is centered on the galaxy, that we have absolute advantages for the ability through expanded dimensional access to go into the center of our soul, to go into the center of the wheel, go into our oversoul, where each lifetime is like a linear spoke. And when we go into the center, we have the ability to take the control. We have the ability to put out a wave of those beliefs that serve our highest good. And in this sense, we have an understanding, even if it is at first an axiom. We have the ability to understand how the mechanics work. That when we go into the center of our soul, we are outside of time. We are in the area of multidimensionality where all of our lifetimes coexist, and we can choose the reality that fits harmonically. So that if you have a trauma in one lifetime that is overbleeding, some traumatic circumstance, death by drownings, loss of a child, being involved in any kind of really traumatic situation, that tremendous fear can bleed over. And this is where you can go into the center and absolutely change the seeming past. Create a harmonic in which everything is exactly as you created. In a certain sense, our beginning lifetimes are like a musical chord that don't harmonize. And we are in this very complex process of moving forward, required to convert all of those into a beautiful symphony. And once we get them into the symphony, we've completed what we came here to do. And it's an incredible process, but I think that is exactly how it works.
In your book, 2012 and Beyond, Metatron says that for most on the planet, December the 21st, 2012 will come and go, and the world will say nothing has changed. But while the template of expansion occurs this year, the mass enlightenment of mankind will not follow for several centuries.
Yes.
Really, in essence, 2012 is simply going to give us more tools to work with. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, and that's a great question, because I think a lot of people in metaphysics are setting themselves up for the idea that on the graduation, the rebirthing of the new Earth, which is 21 December 2012, everything's going to immediately change, and that's not the case. I believe that what happens first of all, I believe that the mechanics of the ascension, the actual ascending process of the ascension does not occur on December 21st. It occurs on the 12-12-12. Now, that's a different topic, so I won't go too far into that, other than to say that the first 12 years of this particular millennia had these triple dates. And I received information about that back in 1999 and shared that. In fact, at the time I was writing on the Lightworker website and wrote about the 12 platelets of the grid. But the grid completes on the 12-12-12. The 144 grid, which is a double pentadodecahedron. And each of the 12 major platelets on that geometry represent the 12 dimensions, represents the 12 strands of DNA, the whole base 12 aspect that is essential to our physics. But it is on the 12-12-12, the final of these 12 triple dates, that the grid completes, all of the networks fall into place, and we jump into 12-dimensional access. That is the ascension. That is the expansion, and that's what an ascension is, of the word upward. The rebirth of the new Earth occurs on the winter solstice of December 21st, 2012. And at that point, the Earth, in a sense, what happens after the 12-12-12, to put it in computer vernacular, is a rebooting occurs. And the rebirth is the December 21st. And at that point, the Earth is in 12 dimensions. The crystalline frequency is completed, particularly in dimensions 5 through 12. And it is the arc swing of duality that lessens. But 3D, and this is very important, the third dimension is not going to disappear. Why would it? You cannot really have higher dimensions. You can't have the 5th or the 12th without having 1, 2, 3, and 4. And Earth will remain duality planet. But what is available to the enlightened human is an accelerated ability to operate in those higher dimensions, to lessen the arc swing of duality, so to speak. And so what happens on December 22nd, 2012, will be the graduation of the Earth. But mankind are not going to suddenly stop going to work. War in the Middle East isn't going to suddenly end. Where corporate greed is still going to exist. The economy is still going to be in a mess. And people are still going to need to manifest the abundance to support their lives. So what Metatron tells me is that it will take approximately 300 years for the critical mass, meaning more than 50% of humanity, to reach that advanced enlightened stage. In other words, it's going to take time for most of humanity to begin to operate in the higher 12 chakra systems, to be able to operate with that crystalline energy and be in that higher framework. December 21st is less than 6 months away. And so it's important that people realize this. This does not mean the ascension did not take place. The ascension will take place. It is going to happen. And we have worked a long time to make it happen. But the critical mass involvement of mankind to get away from the greed, from the war, and all that will take about 15 generations.
Do you? What will we, those people who are, do consider themselves more enlightened, what do you think they will experience?
I think most of the people that are in that, Metatron says about 9 or 10% of the planet are who made the ascension happen. And that is going to begin to grow, obviously, over the next 15 generations. I think for most of the people, the ascension has essentially already occurred. And that is the ability to more easily go into higher dimension, to more easily go into these higher frequential states and understand the true nature of our reality, the nature of our purpose. As long as we are in physicality, we will have to deal with duality. We will have to deal with physicality. But we are here as the envoys to lead the way through example of creation of the world that we want to occur. I think that what's going to happen on December 21st is that we have an enhanced ability to manifest those positive energies that we want to bring into place. If the idea that 10% have created the ascension and 90% have not had the awareness of it, then you have the clear picture of how positive energy frequentially opens keys, frequentially creates. Negative energy does not. Dark energy does not. We have to be in duality in order to create, to have the polarities. But I think the arc swing of that's going to lessen, and by that I mean decisions will be easier to make. I think that the understanding of metaphysics, particularly with the new generations that are reincarnating with the 12-strand DNA, will naturally have an inclination to believe the expanded beliefs, to break away from the fear-based patriarchal religions that have held us back. I think that religions are going to have to change, that the truest religion is goodwill. And I think that the ones coming in are naturally going to know, going to understand why we're here and how this works, and that's what's going to lead us forward. A lot of people that consider that they're on their last lifetime now, I think, are actually going to come back for the critical mass in about 15 generations, which is a heartbeat, really. I think that the people that believe in the truths of our reality in many ways are already experiencing the ascension. I mean, if you think of the ascension of our planet occurring in a cycle, if you think of it as our solar system centered on the Milky Way galaxy, what is 6 months out of 26,000 years? I don't think that this doomsday prophecy has any credibility. I don't think there will be an asteroid hitting the Earth. I do not think the axis of the Earth is going to shift I don't think that there will be even a magnetic pole reversal. I think that there will be the regional cataclysms. There's purpose in some of these that are upshifting and cleansing, these Class 5 hurricanes, these super tornadoes. All of these things have their purpose. I do think the levels of the ocean will rise, but gradually. But I think that it is going to happen in many ways, has already happened.
Well, Metatron did say that 2012 will simply give us more tools to work with. Do you think those tools are going to be energetic? Are they going to be technological?
I think it's both. I think that the tools will simply be that we have the disciplines, we have the information. There are people bringing about the knowledge to teach people how to manifest more easily, how the idea of belief that I think we will have greater access to multidimensionality. We have the ability to learn how that works. I think that the new generations being incarnated now already know much of this. And so I simply think it is a gradual process then of bridging the divine mind, the information that is in the divine mind, directly into the 3D mind, and using that through the pineal to create what we want. We are here to solve this puzzle. And I think that the ascension gives us the format, gives us the tools to do that more easily. I tell people that the completion of the new grid is like Windows 2012. It's a computer program. But it is a computer program that has far more programs available, and they can be worked a lot easier. You and I remember the old DOS system where it was just, these little digital block letters, and it was really, really hard. And then Windows came in and just completely changed it. That's what the grid is. The grid is a new program, Crystalline, that allows us far easier access of using our tools to get into more programs / dimensions and making them all work together in a far easier way, in a far more organized way.
Tib, you mentioned earlier Graham Hancock and various other people, and you have several of these people. You've actually managed to bring them all together for your own 12-12-12 event. How did you pull that off?
Well, it took a lot of work, but I think it was meant to be. It took me 2 years to get in touch with Graham Hancock, as I mentioned, and we have Graham Hancock, John Van Auken, who is the executive director of the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the ARE, and we have David Hatcher Childress, who has written 34 books, I believe. He's on the History Channel a lot on the Ancient Alien series. In fact, so is Hancock. John Major Jenkins, who's been on the Oprah Winfrey program and is an absolute expert on the Mayan calendar. And we have Dr. Sumer Osmanagic. What I feel is it was meant to be. It's in Arkansas for a reason. Cryon channeled in 2002 that evidence of Atlantis was in Arkansas. And in fact, that was a trigger for me. That was what motivated me to learn about that and to begin writing. That was a huge motivator for me. I was actually at that conference when he channeled that evidence was in Arkansas, and it turned on a light for me because that's where I'm from. And so it makes sense. Cayce spoke about Atlantis being divided into two groups, the Aryans and the Poseidons, who were the Law of One. The Aryans he called the sons of Belial. They were the ones that politically duped everyone and gained control of the crystals. And the Law of One were actually a matriarchal society, and according to Edgar Cayce, achieved the highest spiritual frequency ever achieved on the planet. Not in Lemuria, in Atlantis, during what he referred to as the Golden Age. And so this is, I believe, the prophesied return of the Law of One. And it takes place in Arkansas, which is the largest crystal deposit on the planet. And the promise is the crystals will never again be misused. And so John Van Auken is going to speak about Cayce's Atlantis. Graham is going to speak about the history of mankind that has been hidden. And John Major Jenkins about the 12th wave of the Mayan calendar, Dr. Samir Osmanagich about the amazing discoveries in those Bosnian pyramids. And it's just going to be amazing. And so I think I have helped putting this group together. In fact, I was told in panel about 2 years ago that we would be able to reach Graham Hancock, and I almost gave up on it, and we finally did. And he has agreed to come. And all of these, according to Metatron, were members of the scientist priest of Atlantis, and so they're meant to be there. And there are a lot of people receiving that call. This is the return of the Law of One. It's going to be an amazing gathering. We have over 400 signed up for it. We have capacity for 700, and I think it was going to sell out. But it's going to be a very, very powerful gathering. So thank you for mentioning that.
Who could stay away with such a gathering and at such a time?
Well, it's an amazing place. We have a very, very powerful group coming, and we'd love to have you there. Absolutely, absolutely.
So in the meantime, we're almost out of time now. Would you just like to tell our listeners what you've got coming up next, Tib?
Yeah, well, the 12-12-12 is going to be amazing, and if anyone would like more information about that, they can visit our website, www.earth-keeper.com, or email us at tiburon@hotmail.com, and we'll tell you that. That's going to be a big event. In about 4 weeks, I'm taking a group of 85 people to Ireland, and next year, in either February or March, we're finalizing this now, we're going to take a group to Easter Island and Tierra del Fuego, Patagonia, in Chile. Chile is an amazing, amazing place. And so we're organizing a pilgrimage to Easter Island, which is owned by Chile. A lot of people don't recognize that or realize that. And then we're going to Patagonia. And then later in the year, we're going to Australia. We're going to Uluru, and we'll be teaching the Metatronic Keys in Sydney. And so we will also have an event again in Mount Shasta next year. And so we'll have all of our 2013 information on the website fairly soon.
Well, we've just had a question posted in the chat room asking, are there going to be any CDs from the 12-12-12 gathering?
Possibly. We will have live stream videos, but because of the level of the speakers that we have to get different agreements, and some of them have agents, and it's a little bit more complicated to provide DVDs, but we will provide live stream video. And that will be left online for a couple of weeks for people to watch it if they can be.
Great. Tib, I still have so many questions on my list left unasked. Will you come back again?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.